Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Happy Library Week. Thank you so much for joining the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund's Creator Conversations. We are so thrilled today to welcome our board member, Jean Luen Yang, who will be hosting a conversation with the extraordinary Mariko Tamaki. I'm Charles Brownstein. I'm the executive director here at Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, and this week we are celebrating libraries and providing a lot of resources to help you fight the scourge of identity censorship. This is the largest area of book challenge and censorship that we at CBLDF have been managing over the last year. Drama by Raina Telgemeier was just for a fifth year named to the top 10 most frequently banned and challenged books in the country. We have a lot of resources about that book and how you can use it in your curriculum. But we also have released a new resource called Overcoming Identity Censorship that everybody that's joined this webinar will get a copy of at the end of the presentation time. So this is a good opportunity to celebrate libraries and celebrate the fact that books give everybody the space to experience fully what it is to be themselves and what it is to inhabit the world through other eyes. And this right is sacrosanct. This right is something that makes us all better human beings and needs to be upheld to the fullest. And the fund is very strong on promoting this idea and creating resources to help those of you out in the education space uphold this ideal, and those of you out in the reader space to experience this idea, because freedom of expression is the freedom to be yourself. So who do you want to be? At the CBLDF, we encourage you to be the light and to illuminate your communities with tolerance, understanding, and the joy of comics and free expression. And there could hardly be anything more joyful, I think, for students than being able to experience comics in the classroom. For those of us that are, kind of gray hairs, we grew up with that as the dream, and it's a real privilege to be serving a world where younger folks are able to actually inhabit these magnificent worlds in the space of their learning. So I'd like to introduce our education coordinator, Karen Evans, to talk about a really exciting program that we have for you, and then we'll get to the main conversation. So take it away, Karen.
Awesome. Thank you, Charles. So I'm here to just briefly share some exciting opportunities out there. I want to thank all of our participants who are already members with CBLDF and support our work. And a special thank you to members from our League of Graphic Novel Educators. So our League members get some special perks, including webinar opportunities like this, and some exclusive things that are just for League members. So the League of Graphic Novel Educators is for teachers, librarians, anyone who's interested in raising readers through the power of graphic novels and the comic arts. We provide ready-to-use resources and a really supportive community to help you have confidence sharing graphic novels and comic arts with youth. And one of the things that is fantastic and kind of special is we have a book club group. We meet every other month and we pick a book that would be a good text for a classroom. We read it, and then we come together virtually in a community like this to discuss how we can use that with students. And CBLDF, through the League, provides resources that are only available to League members. Outside of the League, I just want everyone to know that there are a ton of resources for using graphic novels in your classrooms and in an educational setting already a part of CBLDF's work. We have coming up next month, I have to give a little shout out for Gene. His book, Superman Smashes the Klan, comes out May 12th, and we have a graphic novel guide for using that with students. So that will be coming out in May. So there's a lot going on, and we hope you join us at the League. If that sounds interesting and useful to you, it's cbldf.org/league is our landing page, and I'll pop it up here for a quick second so you can see. So we have some great things going on. We have exclusive things coming from our creators as well that are exclusive to League members, and it's free to be a League member. So there's nothing stopping you from joining our great group and building up your confidence and getting those resources you need to use graphic novels.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you all.
All right, thank you, Jennifer, for your comment in the comments blank. I'd like to take this opportunity to say we are going to be having a Q&A period. Please put your questions for Gina Mariko in the Q&A blank, not the chat blank, but please do feel free to use the chat for conversation amongst each other. We'll be sharing resources as they're described over the course of the panel. Sienna, our Community Development Manager, who is our major domo hosting this event, has already posted a couple there for you. So please, again, please do put your questions in the Q&A, not the chat. And so without further ado, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the staff members at CBLDF who have created these great resources for you. We are here to help. We are going to get through this together, and community is our superpower. So if there's anything that you see that needs to be done that you think we can do, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And if you can support our work by becoming a member, that helps things move along and helps us do what we need to do. So we'll talk about that more at the end of the presentation. But for now, we are going to drop off screen and we are going to turn it over to our outstanding guests, Jean and Mariko. Take it away, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you all. How's it going?
It's going good. I'm
Now that we got all the white people out of the way.
Asians. The Asians pouring from all sides. Yeah.
Thank you everyone
I had rice for breakfast too. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here, for celebrating National Library Week with us. This is weird, right? This is weird.
Yeah.
I've been doing a few like author events for the past couple of weeks, and this is an extraordinary time to be anything. But I think for book people, there's an extra little twist. We're celebrating libraries right now. We can't even be in a library.
Yeah, it's a little, but I still feel the library power. I still feel like I have a couple of friends who are posting like, I got this library book before they shut down, and now this book is mine, and I'm like, okay, man, library rules. Still library rules. I probably have a couple library books around here, but yeah.
Well, you know, the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is what is it like to be, like, what's your life like right now, like in terms of just being an author and also being a human being?
I mean, I think it's like the author life is a pretty solitary, like it's a pretty sheltering life anyway, right? Like you're mostly at home, and I feel like I think my house is much cleaner. You know, my partner and I are getting to spend more time together. We're making amazing meals. We don't have kids, so it's quiet. And doing a lot of reading. The other day I was like, you know, like I hand grind my coffee now, and I was sitting on my couch with my hand ground coffee and like my book, and I was just like, yeah, you know, like it's terrifying. Like I talk to my parents and I'm terrified, but also, yeah, you know, it's a writer life. And I also feel like I'm appreciating books so much more right now. Like I feel like I'm really like sinking into books right now because I feel like I have the space and I really want to be somewhere else. So I'm appreciating it. What are you doing right now? I mean, because you have a house full of kids, so it's a little different.
I know. Our house is not quiet. We have 4 kids. They're constantly loud. I mean, you might have heard them earlier. I kept texting my wife going, please make them be quiet, please. We talked about this. I'm on a Zoom.
Yeah, I told you.
I know. I just talked about this like 10 minutes ago, and they're like super loud. But I think you're right though. I think there is like in some ways everybody's kind of living like a cartoonist now. Everyone's living like an author now, right? We're all kind of locked up. We're spending most of our time alone, and it's strange. Are you like I've been reading a lot too? Although I feel like I've had a hard time concentrating. You know, I've
heard that. I weirdly am not having a hard time concentrating. I say that now, knock on wood. And actually the thing that I found that I'm reading is like I'm reading prose, which normally like I feel like comics are so much of like, like eat, sleep, and breathe, like comic scripts, comic pencils, comic pages, like everything. And then this is the first time I finished a prose novel. I finished Shiri Dimaline's Empire of the Wild, which is just like a stunning book. And I was just sitting there the whole time like, wow, prose. I mean, prose is some work, right? Like you have to just like sit. It's just words. But it's been nice to just have like, I mean, normally where I read is on a plane. So so it's been kind of interesting to have that. Yeah, also like I still like my local comic store is doing a thing where you can order books and then you can go pick them up and they just leave them outside. Like it feels very like secret agency. Like you call them and you're like, I'm here, and they're like, okay, don't get away from the door, and you're like hiding, and then they put a bag outside and you're like, thank you. I got Michael DeForge's new book, which is really incredible. So yeah, like I'm still getting my comic, but it's like, you know, like you have to walk across the village and like to get it in person, you know, like, so that's kind of interesting actually.
Yeah, I haven't done that yet. My local comic book shop does have curbside pickup, and they told me they have a fat stack. So I need to do it. I need to go there. I need to pop open my trunk, stick the stuff in, and then I drive away like a secret agent.
Exactly.
Agent. Yeah, I didn't realize Michael DeForge had a new book. I'm gonna have to go get that.
It's really good. It's really good. It's all about kind of the sort of idea of upgrading and sort of multiple realities, and like how constantly having things get better, kind of how that sort of deteriorates the sort of original thing in some ways. And his art is so, like, that's the thing I love about comics, is that the art can be so surreal and abstract that you totally know what's happening, like this kind of marriage of word and picture. So yeah, it's really great.
Yeah, his stuff I've always found terrifying, you know?
Yes. And yeah, I mean, and I think that's also, like I said, like I think it's something comics does really well, is get into really gritty, terrifying things, but also in really abstract ways. Like I think some of the most terrifying comics I've ever read have been like, you know, like what's not Jodorowsky's Dune, but you know, like those kind of super detailed sort of science fiction-y comics versus like things where you're just like, you know, it's just like a picture of a circle and like, you know, this text is like, everybody is dead. And you're just like, oh, why is the white circle so much scarier than like actually seeing it? Yeah. Like I finished Tom King's Not Deceased, like one of his series, which is just about like superheroes. Like there's like a halfway house for superheroes who are dealing with trauma.
Heroes in Crisis.
In Crisis.
Yeah, I read the first couple issues of that.
That's some dark stuff, man. Yeah. Like I was like, this is like, you know, it's like the Run Rabbit Run of comics. It's really, it's quite something,
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy, right? You have people in spandex and they're doing really, really terrifying things. And Michael DeForge especially, I feel like he uses such a, I don't know if cartoony is the right word, but it's on the simple side, or I mean, I guess abstract is a great way of explaining it. So it's just shapes, but they're terrifying. They're terrifying. You usually think, I think usually when I think of like terrifying movies, it's usually about like details, like gore. But for him, it's something different at work. It's really, really amazing.
Yeah, I think that's actually like, you know, I mean, it's funny because I think too, the sort of, you know, there's some really brutal realities that I think are definitely books that, like, you know, whenever people, like some people will say, you know, it's a graphic novel, like, would you recommend this for a kid? And, you know, the answer is always like, it depends on the kid, you know, like I always hesitate to recommend anything for any kid because I feel like the drastic difference between how kids respond to emotion, how they respond to violence, how they respond to sexuality in books is so vast. The idea that you could just say like, your kid will be fine with this. I feel like, I always say to people like, I don't think it ever hurts for you to read it first. And for you to read it, like to be within arm's reach. Like if you're concerned about your kid reading something, then don't let them read it under their bed by themselves, secreting it away from you, you know, like make it a public thing so that they know that they can talk to you about what they do and don't understand from whatever book they've read.
Yeah, and to tie it into National Library Week, I think that's what the library is for, right? And that's why we need librarians, is because we need to be reading in community. I mean, reading is super solitary, but it also is a way of building community because you're sharing a story with other people. Yes. I totally agree with you too about kids, about how kids, like, it's hard to say this is good for all kids. Yeah. I'll give you an example. I did a book called Boxers and Saints, which is probably my bloodiest book so far. Although compared to like Michael DeForge's stuff, it's not terrifying at all. But I got my galleys in when my oldest, he's now 16, he was 9 years old. He's like, can I read it? I was like, I don't know. It's got a lot of blood in it. It's got like a head. It's got a severed head in it. So I wouldn't let him read it. And he just snuck it away. He just snuck it out of my office And he read it, and afterwards he's like, "This was fine, Dad. I don't know what you're all freaked out about." So it just taught me, like, sometimes kids will
obeyed me.
yeah, like kids will find the books that they need, you know.
Yeah.
And you just kind of got to be there to support them.
Well, and my favorite story about, well, not my favorite story, but like there was a teacher who said to me once that they had like a stack of graphic novels, and this one summer was in the stack. And a kid went up and was like, "I want to read this because it looks like it's like about a beach." And the teacher was like, "Oh, it's sort of about a beach." So the kid went back off with the book, and they came back like, 10 minutes later, and he was like, "I don't want to read this book. It's like, I think it's too sad. Like, I don't think it's a good book for me." And the teacher was like, "Great." And the teacher said to me, like, "Isn't that an amazing example of like how part of encountering art, encountering people in the world is understanding when something isn't for you, and like the ability to make that choice within an environment where you're being supported." Like, I'm sure lots of kids made that choice about this one summer because they're like, "Oh, it's just two girls talking half the time. Like, I don't want to why I read this. Oh, it's gonna be cool." But like, you can also make the choice. You can make the choice based on taste. You can make the choice based on like whether or not you're ready. Like, I think, there's always a mix of like things that you encounter that you're not ready to see, and things that, like, I definitely had books that I didn't understand when I read them the first time because I wasn't ready. So, I think there was like the first time I read Flowers in the Attic, I was like, "What is this?" I was like, "I don't think I understand what's happening here." All my friends were obsessed with it, and I was like, "I don't get it. Like, there's in the attic. Why are they in the attic? So weird." Yeah, because you don't get it, So
yeah,
I think that that's part of the conversation that I think is really important to have. I think the sort of moniker of being like a banned book, right? Like this kind of idea of the sort of yes or no of like, this book has been challenged or this book has not been challenged, as opposed to like a general lack of conversation about how we encounter art and how we encounter images and how we encounter, it's like not reading books that are problematic, for other reasons, like things that people have decided are not okay to read because they represent like an older perspective or an older point of view, or the kind of racism that was sort of standard in like the 1940s versus now, right? Like, I think the idea that those things have to disappear as opposed to they require more conversation is always the thing that I find frustrating.
Are you talking about Tintin?
Oh, I mean, like, I don't like it because I have like a visceral reaction to that stuff. Like, to me, like, I'm sorry, all the Tintin fans out there, but I don't tend to read those things. It's like how I don't read or don't watch a lot of old movies, because especially if there's a Chinese character.
It can be rough.
Yeah, I just am not interested in that. But I think like one of the conversations that's always happening is in an educational environment, when do you include these things as part of an educational task to say, we want to include these books because we want to show you the breadth of history of this thing, that this medium has been used by different people and to express different perspectives for longer than just like the past 10 years. And some of the older books are sexist, are racist, are homophobic. So do you not then include them in an educational environment or in a curriculum because of the things that they represent?
I mean, for Tintin, I am a moderate Tintin fan. I'm not like a super huge Tintin fan, but part of it is, I mean, some of those early books are rough. You know what I mean? They're like rough, and I don't know if it's appropriate to, like, I think those need to be read in conversation, especially the early Tintin books. And I also think that if you take Tintin as a body and you just read from beginning to end, you can see him kind of struggling with a lot of these ideas. What does it mean to represent people well? And I don't know if he gets to the best place ever, but he definitely gets to a much better place than where he started, Right. The Blue Lotus is not a perfect book, but compared to like some of the earlier stuff, it's just, there's much more humanity in the characters of color.
Right. And I think that's the difference, like, especially, I think the first time I ever went to Europe and I saw what they were reading and the sort of breadth of things that were part of sort of their comic book history, like our first, like, Jillian and I's first Belgian book tour, it was like Tintin, it was Tintin heavy. It was a lot of
they're obsessed with like Tintin and Donald Duck, dude. Those are the
like all that stuff.
staples.
yeah, like their sort of perspective on, like their perspective on history and on it as sort of like art history. And, like I think we had like one conversation where there was probably like a bit of a language barrier too. And I was like, I do not like these books. Do not like these books.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, it's your inability to overcome your, your prejudices. And I was like, my prejudices? I was like downhill from there.
Yeah.
So yes.
Yeah. Well, okay. So speaking of that, the theme of the talk today is identity censorship, right? And you've just talked about how, especially with older content, sometimes there is problematic stuff, but it is also part of it's in dialogue with things that come later, right? And it seems like you have experienced what it's like to be taken out of the dialogue completely. Do you want to give some specifics on some of your experiences?
I guess the thing is so it never came up until this one summer won Prince and Caldecott Honors, I think in like 2016. And I remember it was like, first of all, and all the librarians, I apologize, but I was Canadian. I am Canadian. And so when I first heard about these awards, I was like, somebody was like, oh my gosh. And I was like, oh, is it a big deal? And they were like, so, and then when I went to the ALA, I was like, oh, this feels like a big deal. This feels like a thing. And Julian even was like, how can you not know about any of this stuff? And I was like, I'm come from, like, I'm Canadian. I've heard of like the Governor Generals. So librarians started coming up to me very covertly, and they were like, your book is going to get pulled from a lot of shelves. And I was like, oh. I was like, why? And they were like, well, because it's the Caldecott and many libraries order all the winners, just kind of like off the top. And they were like, you're going to get included with a lot of kids' books. And then librarians are going to see that you are not a kid's book. And a couple librarians were like, you shouldn't even have won this award. I mean, let's be honest. And I was like, I don't really care.
They said that to you, like, to your face?
I think a couple people said, like, it's very strange that you've won this award because it's
really
kids' books. But I was like, because then I read the Wikipedia page, I was like, I think it's like up until like 12 or something. And this one summer was categorized, I think, as like 12 to 16 or something like that, or 12.
Yeah.
We were just kind of floating on that edge. Like, this one summer is not a children's book. I think anybody who opens the first page of this one summer knows it's not a children's book. But those technically, I guess, are not the parameters of the Caldecott. So I had gotten the sense that like we were sort of being like put into more people's sort of view as a book, and that things were going to come up. And then that's when sort of like there was a news story in Florida about a woman who had complained. And so there was like one of the local news stories about us, which was like, I mean, you haven't lived until you've been on local news. And then that's when like that year I just kept hearing stories. Like librarians would come up and say, my principal pulled your book and it's in his office. Or they would say, like, I know that your book has been taken off the shelves and they're just not saying anything. Or your book has been challenged, or whatever it was. And yeah, and then that's when I think that year we were #1 on the challenge book list. But I think that it was kind of like I think any stats person would tell you that part of that was because we had kind of boosted numbers because of the possibility of people ordering this one summer as part of the sort of Caldecott bundle, and then realizing that it was like maybe not ideal for the kids book section. And so then we were a news story because we were #1. Which I was shocked by. I was like, how can we be #1? And then, yeah. And I think the thing is too is, I think, especially because the book itself is pretty subtle, like the story is, about these two kids. They're talking about things that I talked about when I was on the beach when I was a kid. They talk about their bodies, and they talk about, there's like it's funny because part of the story is based on a joke. When I was a kid, there was a turkey hatchery by our cottage. And every time we drove by it, my dad would say, well, that's where your brother was born. It's like such a dad joke, right? So I used that as like this. And also there was a Burger King in Niagara Falls that my ex-wife told me if you eat at that Burger King, you're going to get pregnant. Which I was like, I like wrote that down. I was like, I'm going to use that in something because that's amazing. So I included this thing in the book that's about this turkey jerky that makes you pregnant. And so I think like that, the combination of that, you know, like little things, right? Like one of the characters has a lesbian aunt. There's like mention of like reproduction. There's mention of like various things. Yes, and I think that was sort of the things that people flagged, because I think we were flagged for LGBTQ and sexual explicit content, which is fascinating because also it made me think more like there really isn't any, like there's no, you know, with graphic novels, especially getting into anything sexual, you know, like depicting them immediately pushes you into a different place. Like depicting sexuality or sex immediately pushes you into a different place. So really the things that were being mentioned in this book were so subtle, and to have that be a thing that would sort of kick people into feeling that it wasn't appropriate really got me thinking more and more about like just how monitored that space was, like how monitored the space of what kids can and cannot read really was like in this country. Yeah.
Well, so, you know, we've talked about this before, and I've said that in terms of being banned, I feel like I'm a novice and you're the pro. Because I've been banned a little bit. I've been banned a little bit, but not that much.
What's been banned?
Well, it's American-born Chinese, and it's because of the stereotypes, right? That like
that's hilarious.
I draw Chinese stereotypes on the page. There's a character called Cousin Chinky. The embodiment of all the negative Chinese stereotypes, and it's it's a disturbing image, or it's supposed to be. I have heard from folks that have found him just like funny and cute.
So fascinating. I would have thought that Boxers and Saints, because of the sort of depiction of
like blood. I've had a little bit. I've had a little bit of pushback. I don't know if it's ever been outright banned, but I have had like, so in one scene in Boxers and Saints, I talk about these rumors that were spread among the Chinese back then. Boxers and Saints about the Box Rebellion, said 1900. And back then, you know, the Europeans came in, the Chinese were not happy about it. So there were all these like rumors about what the Europeans did, that they would like drink menstrual blood before they would go out to battle. And that would give them like these superpowers, you know? So I got some pushback for that. I was like, why'd you include this in your book? It's gross. And then I sent back, I basically sent back a citation. I was like, oh, I got this from, you know,
you're so nerdy.
The Box
You're
Rebellion
like,
by Diana Preston. It's on this page.
Historical precedent.
Like, oh, okay, never mind.
That's amazing. I think the thing that's been very odd about it is that I never felt like anything that I've ever included in a book stepped over the line. Like for me, it's never stepped over the line. And so it was interesting to have somebody else characterize what you've done. You know, like it kind of puts it into perspective as like a social issue and not an artistic one. I've never felt like it's an artistic thing. I've always felt like, you know, especially the thing that's always helped me with a list is when you see who else has been banned. And when the vast majority of them are queer issues, then it becomes very clear what's happening. It's not about like a concern about, in my mind, it's not about a concern about, you know, pushing content that's going to be upsetting or, you know, too graphic or whatever. It's about, we don't want any message about this to be, any message about LGBTQ identities to be included. Like two boys kissing is almost always in the list. And, you know, the book about jazz is always on the list. And so that you sort of see like, and drama is always on the list, which, you know, makes it pretty clear that that's what it is.
Yeah. So it's exactly what Charles was saying before we started, right? It's identity censorship. So, well, speaking of that, I mean, I think what you say about, you know, writing about things in a sensitive way, you know, you say you're right. I think it's totally true. You know, I think it's totally clear, and it's clear in this book too. So is this your latest? Was this your latest one to get published, or did Harley Quinn come after this?
No, Harley Quinn came out first, I think.
Oh, so this is the latest.
Very latest,
so,
yes.
So let's talk about your very latest book. Okay, so
Okay.
this is one that you wrote and was
I wrote.
drawn by the amazing Rosemary Valero O'Connell.
Yes.
I'm going to show some interior pages.
Yeah, she's unbelievably talented.
It's gorgeous. This is a gorgeous, gorgeous book. Do you want to give like a synopsis of it?
Yeah, it's about a girl named Freddie who is a high school student in California. And at the beginning of the story, she has this girlfriend, girlfriend Bourdine, who breaks up with her. And then you quickly learn that this person has broken up with her many times, that this is kind of like their third round of breakup. And it's essentially a book about, about relationships, about not necessarily falling in love, but what it means to sort of be in that place where you are in love, and where being in love and being in a relationship is painful, is the thing that is destructive in your life. And it's really also about sort of who you become in those situations, like the kind of friend you are and the kind of, the person that you are when you're in a situation that is, toxic, basically. Yeah. It's like I feel like I'm on the edge of not necessarily knowing what else I want to say about teenagers. And it was really like, I'd always wanted to write a romance. And then as soon as I started writing it, I was like, oh, I'm writing a post-romance. Like I'm writing a story that's about not being in love anymore. And I do think that the sort of narrative of like falling in love is so strong in teenage literature. The idea that the goal is to find someone who's the perfect person, as opposed to like most of your life is not about finding the perfect person. It's about being in these various relationships, and like, finding a person to love is like not even 1% of your actual relationship. Like everything else happens afterwards. So getting into that.
I mean, what I appreciate about this book is, so there's this guy, his name is Brian McDonald. He's like a screenwriter, and he wrote this book called Invisible Ink. That's a craft book. Have you read that?
No.
You know that book? Okay, it's awesome.
No.
It's an awesome book. But in there, he talks about how the stories with staying power always have some survival information, right? Like there's something about that the book is trying to tell you that will help you survive life. So the thing that I got from this book is like when you date somebody or when you get into a romantic relationship, one way to tell whether it's a good relationship for you is to see if you're a better friend to your friends. And if you're not a better friend to your friends, then maybe you should get out of that romantic relationship.
Maybe not.
That's such not to be spoilery, but I felt like that was
No. It's funny because Margaret Atwood, like way back in the day, pre what is it? Pre all the other books that most people know of her, wrote this book called, I think it's called Survival or Survival Tips. Maybe it's just called Survival. And basically it's about that the theme of Canadian literature is about survival. Like American literature is like the quest and like victory and like sort of the battle, and Canadian literature is, it's cold outside, this is not a hospitable environment that we are in, we just need to make it through to the summer. So I do think that a lot of my literature, a lot of the things that I write are about kind of trying to deal with a bad situation. That's not about a victory, it's just about like getting through it.
So you think you're a fundamentally Canadian writer?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Almost all my like canon that I grew up with that I still like to me, Cat's Eye by Margaret Atwood is like the best book about being a teenager ever written. It's a book for adults, but like her description of being bullied as like a girl is like, to me, the most harrowing and accurate description of that experience.
Well, so as somebody who has had books banned, I wanted to ask you, how have folks supported you? Like, what's been helpful when that kind of stuff has happened?
Oh, when books have been banned? I mean, I think the thing is that I'm sure you find this too, is that there's like a lot of voices that happen in the public around your work, like you put something out, and the thing with Twitter and the internet is like there's this like feed of opinions about what you have done well and what you have not done well in any given situation. And I think that I have been really lucky to have a kind of core group of people in my life, including you, who I trust, you know, their opinions, you know, like I trust what they say. I trust what they tell me. I trust they're not always just gonna, you know, blow sunshine up my butt, that there's like a detail and like a depth to the things that they have to say about my work. And I feel like listening to those voices is the thing that I try to focus on, and not like everybody else's opinion about what it is that's good or bad about anything that I've done. And I, you know, I'm so lucky. Like I have an incredible partner. I have incredible agent. I have incredible editors. Calista Brill was our editor at First Second. And I feel like there's always been a very strong sense in working on books that I have, that my goal is supported. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you know, and especially when like things like, so I also have your book, Dragon Hoops. And I do think that, like, I'm curious because, like, for me, because this book is like, how long did it take you to do this?
It took me 5 years to finish.
5 years.
It was only supposed to take 2 or 3, and I was just super slow.
But then you decided to do the entire history of basketball. So that took a long time. But I, you know, like, I'm wondering, like, for you, is it the same? Like, I mean, like, on the journey of, like, making a book that large and doing something that big, like, do you have to sort of gather more resources around you to sort of, like, support that process? Or is it just like...
I definitely think so. I mean, I have an awesome wife who, you know, she and I are constantly trying to defend, you know, work time, like time to concentrate for both of us. But I think she's better at it. So she does it more for me than I do for her. And then for this particular project, because it's a nonfiction book about like real people, right? A real team with a coach and players. I got support from them too. So the main coach, the head coach, his name is Coach Lou Ritchie. He was super supportive. He's still super supportive. We're
That's
still
amazing.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to see. It's great to see. And there are things in that book that I was worried about, but like I said, I think I think I'm a banned books amateur because
I did feel a little bit like, and I think, so the other question I wanted to ask you, because I think one of the sort of effects of the sort of banned book, you know, element is like there is a part of writing where you just want to write the thing that makes sense for the book. You don't want to have anything else influence your choices. You just want to sort of focus on the thing that you need to do. But it is absolutely true, especially as you become like aware. Like there were parts of Laura Dean that I felt super sure of, but I definitely had conversations with Rosemary about including certain things in the book.
Yeah.
And I don't want to spoil, but like there's a couple elements in the book that were very like grown-up stuff, and that were, you know, some harsh reality stuff. And, you know, at some point I said, like, the only thing that I can imagine being a reason why I wouldn't include this in the book is because I would be worried that people would have a negative response to it, which to me isn't a reason not to include it. And was there stuff that you, like, it seems like you kind of, the thing that I love about Dragon Hoops is you kind of put that process in the book of like deciding. Yeah.
I mean, the most controversial element of the book, I had a plan B all the way through. Like I ended up leaving it in. Yeah, I ended up leaving it in, but even up till a month before I turned it in, like maybe 2 months before I turned it in, I still had a plan B. I was like, I can pull all this out, I could replace it with this, and I think it could still go. And then I went to Coach Lou's house. You know, we sat there in front of his TV with like ESPN on in the background, and we just talked it through. In the end, he's like, you should put it in. So I was like,
yeah. No, I'm really glad it is in there, because I do think that, I think the thing that I loved about what you included in the book is to include to include the complexity of it, that it is, you know, that to talk about things that are painful and to talk about things that are these sort of dark corners of stories, but that they're there and that there's a consequence to ignoring it and pretending it isn't there. You know, like, I think, you know, my feeling about including anything, like I've had conversations with people where, you know, they said like, I don't want to hear about teenagers doing the things that you described them doing. And I'm like, well, I do though. I think, you know, and I think that part of that is like, I grew up as a person with a pretty dark understanding of what teenagers we're capable of. Like, I feel like I never had like a sunny vision of adolescence. I always thought like, oh, these are just like really bad adults, like a really weird version of adults. And so I've never sort of wanted to put, you know, like a gloss over that. I've always just kind of wanted to feel real as opposed to like nice.
Yeah. I mean, and I think you need, like, even a single reader. We talked about how maybe not every book is appropriate for every kid,
Right.
but even a single kid is going to need different kinds of books at different periods of time in their lives, right? So even if they don't want to read a book that's about dark things now, they could be at a space where they need a book like that, like in 3 months or 6 months or a year. So
yeah, I mean, it's also interesting that like, I know that there have been books that have been put on the list for depictions of alcoholism.
yeah.
And I feel like, to me, that's also fascinating when every television show about teenagers has those teenagers drinking. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
the reality of what we're willing to let people depict on television of these like so-called teenagers who are really like 25-year-olds, you know, versus what we sort of pristinely want in a book, you know, I think is odd.
Why do
Like,
you think there's that divide between?
I think that there, like,
books?
my take on it is that there's a sort of like it's sort of like a kind of intellectualism of like, that books are supposed to be like elevated in terms of their depictions, that there's something more like intellectual or pristine. Like, I think that books also tend to get divided into like, you know, it's like even the divide between, for example, like mainstream comics like DC and Marvel versus like graphic novels, right?
Yeah.
We tend to sort of elevate the so-called literary into being kind of having a higher standard or having kind of like a more aspirational goals. And that there's this kind of like, you know, like floppy, like kind of trash, you know, like, you know, it's like my mom always had a very clear division between her like trash paperbacks that she would read and like real books. Like, you know, and like how what genres get placed into like the sort of less pristine, like how science fiction or fantasy or, you know, anything like romance gets kind of pushed into this kind of like less literary world. And so I think that there is this kind of sense of like, that there's things that you should or shouldn't do in this kind of more elevated place. But I think that like increasingly, you know, that's not true. It's like even the kind of language that we used to expect out of literature. But I mean, for me, I remember one of the first YA books that I read as an adult was King Dork. And I just remember thinking like, oh my God, I was like, this is great. This sounds like a kid. This is amazing. Yeah. And it also made me think of when Douglas Copeland's Generation X came out and everybody was like, oh, this is how 20-year-olds talk. This is amazing. And there was something very like, you know, very pop culture, very like, you know, like then present day about it. But also it was kind of pushing back against this idea of like what literature should be. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's part of why the CBLDF exists.
Like, you know, Andrew Smith, and then you have, you know, people, I'm trying to think of somebody who has like a bit more formal prose style, but I mean, I love them all. Like, I think that that's kind of, and then you have your teenagers who are like Jane Austen.
Yeah. Yeah.
I am sticking with this. This seems much better. I'm not like moving from this. I'm just going to stick with that. Yeah. Like old timey kids. I love an old timey kid who's like, I'm just going to stick with Moby Dick. I'm not really into this like newfangled stuff.
Yeah.
Like, that sounds awesome. We need people like you. That's great. What are your kids into? What are your kids reading?
Right now?
Yeah.
They let's see. Well, so we just got a stack of books from DC Comics from their young readers line.
Oh yeah.
So they've been going through that. Like Shadow the Batgirl was pretty popular at our house, and then Diana, Princess of the Amazons was as well. In Green Lantern Legacy. You know, yeah, you're part of that line.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think I really love that kind of, I think that what they're doing with those books is really fascinating because it is really about taking those things that are these kind of tropes of superhero stuff and just like twisting them a little bit, like just
Yeah.
expanding them. All the books are so different, which I also love. Actually, I have, oh, I'm gonna mess with my setup. I have this, which I just finished reading.
Oh, cool. I haven't
I
read that one
love
yet.
this book. Oh my God. The illustrations in it are so,
Yeah,
they're
look at that.
so,
They're so good.
yeah. Like the Flash, that's so, like, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, it's like, honestly, the art in this is like one of my favorites. Just the way he draws like the faces and getting into sort of the cartooniness of it. And yeah, it's so kind of classic comics, but this like the way he does his panels and stuff like that is so great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hey, folks,
everybody should pick those up.
thank you so
Hi.
much for the great conversation. I'd like to give an opportunity for our audience to ask their Q&A. So
Awesome.
we have first not a question, but a comment from Christy Kemper Hodge. Thank you so much for spending time with us and celebrating libraries and National Library Week. It means a lot to us as a librarian. So thank you for that comment, Christy. It means a lot to us that the librarians are here in force supporting graphic novels and keeping the conversation going. So thank you so much for being here today. Our first question comes from Kevin Wolf. I've always thought that trying to ban a book always leads to that book selling a lot of copies or many more than expected being checked out at libraries. Am I wrong?
You would know better.
I don't think it actually affects, I don't think it affects sales. Actually, I like winning a prize affects sales. Getting banned does not as much affect sales. I will say the thing that I find frustrating is that when people say, if a book is banned at a library, people can always go buy it. And to me, the thing is, it does disproportionately affect people who can't afford to go buy those books. Like taking it out of a place where kids can get them for free is the more frustrating thing. So I have had people say to me like, oh, you must be making more money. And I'm like, even if we were making like a nominally, like slightly larger amount, which would, wouldn't be really that much, like it sucks to think that somebody can't then just read your book.
Speaking from the advocacy side, there's a lot of people really fixate on the wow, what's banned? There's a real kind of titillating quality to the idea of books being forbidden, but there's two audiences that don't have enough visibility. One is the librarian or educator who's doing their job. They're doing their job creating access, and they've been trained as professionals that there are certain criteria that books should meet to be in the collection or to be in the classroom. And so they're actually having their standing in the community undermined or threatened in some cases because they're doing their job. And then the other, of course, are the kids themselves, the readers themselves, where it's especially pernicious in identity censorship, where you're being told there's something wrong with you for identifying with this material. And I think a lot of us have those personal stories, and that's why it's important to speak up for all voices in all books. Okay, thanks, Kevin, for that. Kevin has another question. How do you balance stereotypes, negative and positive, against the shorthand trope to give a starting point for a character? Or do you feel no stereotypes are worthy and all characters have to be well-rounded with no specific identifiers?
That's a good question. I actually think, I think the thing about stereotypes is they're about perception, right? Like stereotypes come from characters. So I try, like, I don't think it makes sense to sort of like, I don't think that there's like some shorthand personalities, like especially personalities that are sort of secondary characters in a book. Like I think, like the nerd or the jock, like there's all these kind of like, shorthand versions of people. To me, the thing that I try to consider is that whatever that shorthand is someone's perception of that person, so that you ground it in like who is perceiving that person as being what they are. Like especially, like it's like there's even ones like the science teacher or like the gym teacher, right? Like there are some shorthands, but I think the more a character is in the sort of central story, the more you add details to complicate those stereotypes. Like that's sort of the task for me.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think thinking of the stereotype as purely perception, like the only reason the character is presented like that is because they haven't yet been given enough on-panel time. I think that's a great way of thinking about it. For me, when I think you're always going to have like a little bit of overlap, right, between a stereotype and the character you're writing. But for me, I just try to write through the stereotype. I try to write it so that the character is deeper. Like, I just think you should be okay. It should be okay for you to write like an Asian math nerd, but that Asian math nerd can't just be an Asian math nerd. They have to have like understandable desires and fears and all of that.
Yeah, like it's interesting. I've been watching Sex Education on Netflix, and I think one of the things that show does really good is it introduces a new character, and you see the shorthand of like who that person is from across the hall, and then you get time to see as soon as somebody starts talking, they're more than that shorthand. And I think that's the thing is I'm aware sometimes that it's like, you know, I always have like a wise gay character in all of my books because I had a wise gay character in my life. And I am very aware that there is a kind of trope of the like, you know, especially the sort of queenie gay who is like a little more worldly than his years, that you have to be careful to also sort of challenge those things, like in terms of like, what really does a 16-year-old know about fashion? I mean, maybe a lot, but you know what I mean? Like you have to sort of put limits on it.
Yeah.
Okay, our next question comes from Anya Karmazina. Mariko, you have a great way of bringing difficult subjects up for discussion. I would like to ask you, how do you deal with self-censorship when writing books? I come from Russia. We've got a great number of censorship laws, and I find it hard to navigate between personal safety and the need to discuss issues of identity. Sometimes I do not even know if I'm holding back because I know the subject is sensitive, or it's because I fear to go to jail.
Yeah.
Wow.
First of all, I'm really sorry that you have to go through that. That's like a horrible thing to have your freedom's limited, especially as an artist and as a person who's like actual safety is threatened. So I'm really sorry you have to go through that. I think for me, like I write in so many different mediums too. Like I feel like when I'm writing my own work, I'm 100% clear on what I have the freedom to do. But definitely when I write for like Marvel or DC, whenever I write for sort of other characters, I feel like I'm like making decisions about what can and cannot fit into that storyline, like what does and doesn't make sense. And probably some of those decisions are about the sort of social feedback that I'm going to get from a different audience that's not just my audience, for doing like different things with different characters. I mean, I think it's hard to support yourself and hard to just like listen to the things that you're wanting to express and wanting to write. I try to just feel really good about the things that I've done, not necessarily in terms of having like complete freedom to do the things that I want, but like, I mean, I think one of the especially for gay literature, I think there's such an incredible history within queer writing and queerness in general of having to find ways of expressing and being a certain thing within like a sort of safe parameter, like, you know, like the kind of covertness and the kind of creative choices that get made in order to sort of push something forward without necessarily being completely overt about it, to me is also sort of like a part of the history of literature. And I don't necessarily I think that there has been, you know, so many amazing like works that have come out of that process as well.
Gene, do you have a comment on that?
I mean, I think
in your work?
Like, I don't even know what that's like, where you feel like if you put out a certain piece of art, you might be physically threatened. And I don't think I've ever, I've never been in a situation like that. So I really do feel for the person who wrote that question. I think what Mariko says does have a lot of overlap with a lot of traditional Chinese literature. You know, China,
Yes.
Not every dynasty was super friendly to art.
Some were less friendly.
And some of the greatest pieces of Chinese literature, like Journey to the West, for instance, some people see as a political allegory that was criticizing the government of the time, you know, and doing it in kind of an oblique way. So maybe that's I mean, I don't think it's awesome that you can't talk about things explicitly, but maybe that's a way of getting through what she wants to say. I guess I would just encourage her not to turn away from her central message, but maybe she'll need to figure out a more oblique way of conveying that central message.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's like the freedom element of that, like, you know, to write when you don't have the freedom to say what you want to say. Yeah. And there's like the sort of social meaning of that, emotional meaning of that. And, you know, there's also this sort of element of all writing, which is, you know, working within boundaries. Like all writing has some level of limitations on it about what you can say, about the length that you have, about the space that you have. And I think, you know, for better or for worse, there are some incredible creative choices that come out of those boundaries.
Our next question comes from Gregory Taylor. Laura Dean is such a great book, terrific story. How did you and Rosemary talk about or collaborate on the visuals? I'm fascinated by the images that are filled with elaborate foliage.
I mean, that's Berkeley, actually, if you've ever been on these streets. So when I first started working with Rosemary, she has family who lives here, so she came and visited, and I discovered that she's very tall. I was like, I look like your old Asian grandma walking around with you. You're so tall and young. So basically, which I've done with other artists, which is always fascinating, is you just sort of watch them walk around and what they're sort of noticing and what they sort of take pictures of for reference photos. And I just saw Rosemary taking picture after picture of all these massive succulents that line the streets here. And I think I did make some comment where I was like, that's a lot of leaves. I'm just going to say that. Like, you can do whatever you want. That's a lot of petals to have to draw. And I had no idea. I mean, I'd seen her work before, but I had no idea it was going to explode into the level of detail and lushness that she creates on the page, which have seen her now as she kind of goes on and does like new works, that she's just expanding and refining that kind of sense of atmosphere that she does in her illustrations. Is just unbelievable.
Jean, you're an artist yourself, but you also do a tremendous amount of collaboration with some really talented artists. How does collaboration impact your work?
So I do have some projects where I do both the writing and the drawing, and other projects where I only handle the writing. And usually the way I make that choice is if there's a story that I feel like I just feel like I need more control. You know, I need to control every line on the page. I'll work on that. And then there are other stories where I know for sure I cannot pull off the art. So for Superman Smashes the Klan, my next book to come out, I collaborated with Guri Hiru, who have also collaborated with Mariko. They're amazing.
They're the
like,
best.
I think they're at least in. I mean, they're in the conversation for the best comic book artists working today, in my opinion. Yeah,
without
they're
a doubt.
absolutely there. Yeah, they're absolutely there. And we wanted a style that kind of looked like those old Fleischer Superman cartoons mixed with a little bit of modern manga, and they totally pulled that off. There's no way that I, as a cartoonist, would have been able to do that.
I will say it's fascinating because I, when I first started working for DC, got to read one of Jean's scripts, and Jean's scripts versus my scripts are like, she walks over here, she puts this thing down, fight, fight, fight. Jean's scripts are like so complicated in terms of like the understanding of the understanding of the task that the illustrator has, and also just like I feel like the detail that goes into them. I felt like when my editor gave me one of Jean's scripts, I was like, I'm not going to do this though, right? Like, you can give me this script, but you know, I'm not going to write this, right?
I could be anal.
But also just like, I think it shows just like your understanding of the page, which I find really impressive. Like, I mean, I think the amazing thing about, like, I have slowly accumulated an appreciation for like paneling, like on a page, like this, like, you know, dividing up a page, and Dragon Hoops is so good for that. There's some like some of the basketball game scenes, I'm like, he drew a basketball game in this book. And the pacing is just fantastic.
So we have one more question, but before we do that, I'm going to turn it over to Sienna to tell you about some of our identity censorship resources that you can use to work with your community. Go ahead, Sienna. And you are muted.
Sienna, you are muted. There you go.
Hey guys, I'm going to just quickly share the screen so you can see the resources we've developed firsthand. One of the ones that just came out this week, you know, as was mentioned, the top 10 list of most frequently banned books of 2019 came out, and 8 out of 10 of those were targeted specifically for LGBTQ content. which are clear cases of identity censorship. So we put together a new toolkit called Overcoming Identity Censorship that's available on our website that kind of goes through some tips on what you can do when you're facing a challenge, how you can deal with it and hopefully overcome it. And, you know, whether it's keeping a book on the shelf or keeping an event from being canceled, you know, we kind of go through all of that. We also have a ton of other resources, including webinars specifically on addressing identity censorship challenges and educational resources on some of the books that have been targeted by identity censorship, like Drama, Fun Home, this one summer. So we have a ton of resources available right on cbldf.org. It's right on the home page. This week, we also launched a new campaign, the Don't Ban Me campaign, because when censors target books for identity censorship, in effect, they are trying to ban people for being who they are. When they're going after how people identify, that's really what they're doing. So we want to make sure that everyone has access to stories where they can see themselves in, and that's what the CBLDF is all about. So CBLDF fights identity censorship by providing legal aid. We oppose censorship laws. We provide counsel to, you know, librarians and educators when they're facing a challenge. And we create resources like this webinar and like the ones I mentioned, you know, just about identity censorship to raise awareness and help fight it. And the best way you can get involved is by becoming a CBLDF member, because when you become a CBLDF member, you help us do all of that. And we couldn't do it without our members. So thank you to all of our members who are watching. And if you aren't a member currently, now's a really great time to join, because to celebrate National Library Week, we are doing a kind of like a bonus giveaway where when you join the fund, you'll also get a pack of Don't Ban Me pronoun pins. So you can kind of, you know, show off your identity and let censors know that, you know, you won't let your identity be banned, you know, from places like public libraries. I'm actually wearing some right now. I'm going to stop sharing the screen, but yeah, everything is right on cbldf.org on our homepage. I've got, I don't know if you can see, but I've got my they them pronoun buttons and my don't ban me pin. So if you join the CBLDF this week, you can get some really cool pins like these.
Whoa.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Sienna, and thank you to everybody out there that is a CBLDF member. We have memberships at all kinds of levels. $30 a year is the starting point, and you get the cool buttons this week. If you can't afford to join right now, we certainly understand, and the world is tough right now for that. That's why the graphic novel, League of Graphic Novel Educators is free. We also encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, to follow us on social media, and you can help by sharing our information with your community, because the more informed our communities are, the better able we are to all of us stand up for each other, make community our superpower, and make sure every voice is heard. So we're going to take this out. We have a last question here from Whitney Terrell that I think is going to be helpful as we approach the weekend and are all looking for ways to augment our reading. Hi, Mariko and Jean. I hope you're both doing well in this difficult time in the world. My question for both of you: do you have a favorite graphic novel or series?
One favorite?
Oh,
well,
just to take it open.
Okay. I recently finished the X-23 series that Mariko wrote. I thought that was pretty awesome.
Did you? Oh, that's
yeah,
cool.
yeah. X-23 is about Wolverine's clone daughter and her younger sister clone, and it's super fun. Yeah, it's super
clone
fun.
Clone. Oh, that's so
and
nice.
They also fight clones. They also fight clones. Yeah.
They fight clones. They fight a lot of clones. It's clones times 1,000. What would I recommend? I mean, like right now I'm reading a lot of graphic novels. I got New Kid I just bought.
Yeah, New Kid is good. New Kid is awesome.
Yeah,
Kid,
I love
the first graphic novel to win a Newbery. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah,
so I'm reading that. I finished Michael DeForge's book, and actually because it was Poetry Month, so I've been reading a lot of poetry. and not so much graphic novels, but oh, this thing. So I'm a big fan of these, actually. I'm not a huge fan of anthologies overall, but this is the Best American Comics. And the latest one was edited by Jillian Tamaki. Look at that. And it's got just such an incredible range. I think she did such a great job of sort of finding kind of different comics. There's a great comic about people who are working like on fracking and stuff like that. Like, it's just such an incredible mix of comics that you would sort of normally not see. Like, there's Vera Broskol's in here too, who's just like,
oh, that's a great book. Be Prepared is awesome. Yeah.
Funny little excerpt in here, but there's also sort of like, you know, different things that you wouldn't necessarily see kind of in your comic store. So I highly recommend it as like, if you're sort of looking for sort of more comics in your life, like aren't we all? It's a really good sort of primer to sort of reading a bunch of different things that you might not find otherwise.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Gene.
Oh, I was gonna say I also have gotten really into Mark Russell's stuff. You've read some of his stuff?
Yes.
Yeah, his stuff is great. So I just got, like, right before all the shutdown happened, I got Billionaire Island. Only the first issue came out, but it was so good. It was really funny.
His Flintstones.
Oh, his Flintstones is it's legendary.
If you want like a fun, weird, sometimes sad, but mostly silly, his Flintstone series, which I think there's like maybe 12 comics in all in the whole series, is incredible.
Yeah, it's so
good. Illustrated by Steve Pugh, which is how I discovered Steve Pugh. And also he does the Wonder Twins.
Yeah, the Wonder Twins is great too. Yeah, his stuff is so good. And Bitterroot. Have you read Bitterroot yet?
No, I haven't.
It's amazing. Yeah, those are probably my two favorite comics right now.
Yeah, that's like a whole weekend of reading we just gave you.
Totally
that's
is.
like a solid stack.
And if you're current on all of Mark's stuff but don't know his secret origin, his books God is Disappointed in You and Apocrypha Now, which he made with Shannon Wheeler, are actually available in the CBLDF reward zone, signed by the authors. And you'll find books signed by authors, including Gene and Mariko there, that we have available for our supporters. So we're shipping a little bit slowly right now, as you might imagine, but you can get signed books and support the cause. We also have, I'm just sharing in the chat blank, free resources for remote learning that includes discussion guides, standards-based lessons plans, and other tools for more than 50 graphic novels. So if you're looking for other reading and you're looking for reading with an eye to including it in the classroom, or just looking for some stuff that maybe is the gap, this is a great list to start with and get some resources to help carry you on your way. So thank you all for being here today. Big thank you to Gene and Mariko. You guys were fantastic to listen to. Thanks for supporting the fund. And thanks everybody out there. Please do share this. Please follow CBLDF online. Please become a member, and please be a part of our League of Graphic Novel Educators. We look forward to seeing you all here again another time. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.